Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in which we learn n8n together. Now, did you ever had your n8n workflow fail and you had no idea why? Or worse, it just stopped silently. Today we'll see how to handle errors in n8n like a pro so your automations don't break. Now, when things go wrong, what is error handling? In any automation, things can go wrong. APIs can fail, data can go missing, or nodes can throw error. Error handling in n8n helps you catch those issues and decide what to do next instead of letting your workflow crash. So we would start this video and see what are the options available. First up, we would always have execution logs. Now, these logs would help us identify the status of any workflow. So as you can see, some workflows are success, some are errored. So this would provide you a complete audit trail of every time your workflow has been executed with the execution IDs, runtime, when it was started, what's the status. By default, manual test runs are not saved, and you can change safe behavior per workflow in settings for both successful and failed runs. And this is what the execution logs is going to look like, and we would see it shortly in n8n as well. The second is the workflow execution history. So for every particular workflow, you can see an execution history every time you have executed it and what were the values. So you can inspect any run. You can go back in the history if you have executed that workflow like 10 times, you can go back in it and like see, check any particular execution. And when you execute, you also see a checkbox mark like a green tick or like a warning sign saying which particular node did fail. So final node states shows you the final state of every node for that run, what data went in and what came out. Debug and fix bugs. You can, check past execution, replay and inspect it step by step. And you can also pin and compare. So you can pin a past execution and compare it to like what changed, right? So those are the few features or I'd say capabilities you would see when you are kind of trying to debug what went wrong. Now, node execution history would somewhat look like this. So you can click on any particular node and you would see that what was the input provided to this node and what's the output that you got. Now, on the output panel, the right-hand side, you do see this pin button. So where you see schema table in JSON, there is a pin button as well. So you can actually also pin the output to compare it. Okay, so you can inspect the input output, see what went in and what came out to identify which node is actually failing. So this is the node execution history. Now, what is error handling? It is the practice of knowing when your workflow failed and having a plan to respond so that if it has failed, you know it failed, you got an email or you got a text and people are looking into it. So you're fixing the error before even business gets to know that something has failed. So you need to modify or like handle the error in such a way that workflow alerts you, it retries, or it triggers a recovery sequence so that the errors are not gone silently. And we would see how we would do that. So the error workflow is first thing, you have to know when things break. You of course can't keep checking 24/7 when your workflow is failing. So you need to have certain event fire automatically whenever any workflow is failing. And this thing can be configured per workflow as well from the settings tab of any workflow. Each workflow can point to its own error handler or a shared one. So I can have a common error handler as well. So any of my workflow fails, that error handler gets triggered and I get a message on my WhatsApp or I get a message on my Slack saying, oh, your workflow has failed. Or you retry, you log so that it also helps you in debugging what went wrong or, creating a Jira ticket automatically so that whatever support team is working on it, they can look into it. Now the error node is somewhat, it looks like that. So you also have a stop and error mechanism. So the error node lets you deliberately stop a workflow and raise an error at any point in your flow. It is used when data hits a state that should never happen. Say, for example, you are creating a case in the Salesforce, but your email address is not valid. Now, that's something that you know that if an email address is not valid, I won't be able to go past that stage. So you're flagging it beforehand. So that's one way to like tackle the error. An error trigger in workflow. So when you create an error trigger, these are the things that you can pass to it. You can pass the workflow name and ID, you can pass the execution ID, you can pass the node that errored, or you can pass a direct link to the execution history for that run. Now we would see how we would build this particular error trigger workflow. So I'm going to switch my screen back to n8n. Now I have created an error workflow and a test error trigger as well. Let's have a look at the error workflow. So this is the error trigger. Okay. What I've done here is, if you go to plus sign and if you go to triggers, you would see a lot of ways to trigger it. And over here, you would also find an error trigger, this one. So it triggers the workflow when another workflow has an error. So I can create this particular workflow as a global to all my other workflows. So whenever any workflow is running into an error, I am sending a Slack message. Now, if I click on the Slack message, these are all the details my error trigger is going to contain. Execution ID, URL, level of error, description, timestamp, context, name, other parameters. These parameters are who are you sending to. So all these it is going to contain. Now, what I'm doing is I am passing a message. I already have configured my Slack here. Okay. And I'm passing it to a particular channel. And this is what I'm passing in the message. My message is warning the active workflow. Okay, before that, let's have a look at what error trigger actually contains. I'm going to fetch a test event. So this is all the information that workflow is going to contain, the error trigger is going to contain. And I can utilize this message to send something to Slack. Okay. So if I go to Slack, so you can see all these information is here. So what I'm passing is, I am passing warning, the active workflow json.workflow.name failed to run. And you can also see how it would look like here. And all that you have to do is you have to just drag and drop here. So I'll say warning messages, example error message. So I can just type it here, right? Or warning, this is a demo of error trigger workflow. So as and when you're typing, you can also see how it's going to look like when you send that Slack message out. And I'm sending it to a channel, and this is it, right? Now I can also execute this workflow. Before I do execute, let me open Slack so that we can also see how the message is being triggered. So this is the channel that I'm sending the message to. Okay. Let that particular thing load. Okay, so now let me go back and let me execute this particular workflow. So workflow has been executed. Now if I go back, I would see 12:20 p.m. and you can check the time now. This is a demo of error trigger workflow, and this message has been received here, automated with this n8n workflow. Now this is me executing the error trigger workflow, but how it actually works in real-time scenario is, if I have any workflow, say for example, this workflow. Now, if this particular workflow is getting faulted, so I am going to intentionally make it fault. So if you look here in the to category of sending a Gmail, I have put FCEF. It's not a proper email address that email can be triggered to. So whenever I'm going to execute this particular workflow, it is going to fail. So what this workflow does is it opens a chat. Whenever I'm chatting, sending anything on the chat box, it just gets some code and it sends those codes, motivational codes, to my Gmail account. It's a very simple workflow to show how it would actually work. Now, this chat can also be accessible on a particular public URL, which is this. Now, whenever I do write something here, my workflow, this particular workflow gets triggered. So let me show you. If I write hi. Now, when I write hi, this particular workflow gets triggered. Okay. And since this is not going to work, what happens is it says error in workflow. And whenever this particular thing fails, I would also get a message here saying that, oh, your workflow has failed. Okay. So you can see 12:21, I got another message saying test error trigger failed to run. Message is connect your Gmail invalid email address. Now that's an intentional error that I've been sending. So I got that particular message here. Okay. So now how to actually run this? So if I have a global error trigger, what I have to do is I have to come here, I have to open settings, and in error workflow, I have to mention my workflow. Okay. So my workflow name is error workflow because currently I only have one workflow created. So I can go to settings and select that particular workflow. If I select no workflow, then I will never be intimated about my error. Okay, so I'm going to select that. Okay, always in terms of whenever there's an error, just call this particular workflow and save. Now I can do this to n number of workflows by creating a same particular error workflow. And the other is stop an error, which would just throw and stop the workflow. So you can display a error message and you can stop the workflow there. So this is another way of stopping it. So if suppose I can put that, if the email address is not valid, then just stop and error it. Okay, so that's another way of handling the error. And this is how you can use a error trigger workflow or stop an error to catch the error and let the business user know that this particular workflow has failed or fix it before even business gets to know about it. So that's it for this particular video, and I shall see you in the next video soon. Thanks for watching.